Hey there, YouTube. My name is Martin McGovern, and you are joining us for Ask a Career Coach with Udacity. Thank you so much for coming out and joining the live stream today. It's Thursday, February 21st, and we're going to be collecting your questions and getting into how to help you with your job search as we go. Thank you again for joining us. If you have, as you join us, we have our kickoff question of the day, and it's going to be about how to prepare for a phone interview and behavioral interviews in general. We also, as you join the chat here, are curious where you're joining us from in the world, and little unique question: what'd you have for breakfast? Today I had an egg and sausage sandwich with a bit of granola and a lot of coffee. So give us a shout. Let us know where you're at, what time it is, and what you're munching on in your part of the world. We're going to give a few minutes here for folks to join the chat. So we'll be officially getting rolling on everything at 2:05 Central Time, which is where I am, but in about 4 minutes for everyone else. Please start adding in your questions to the chat. We have Karen there helping us out. She'll be forwarding all of your questions on to me so that we can go deep into each one of the topics that you want answered for your job search. So as we all join together today, I'll be taking a look here to see where you're all coming from and what's on your mind. Looks like we have Kartik from India. He said peanut crackers and muesli for breakfast. Sounds like a pretty great combo. Peanut crackers sound amazing. We got Ottawa, Canada. Thanks for joining us, Steph. We got Andreas from Germany. Thanks for joining us, Andreas. Ooh, coffee and oats in Canada. Loving it. All right, we got folks joining us from India. Ooh, we got our first questions coming in. I like it. Please add all of your career questions into the chat, and Karen will be forwarding them my way to dig in during our conversation. We got more folks joining from India, Brazil, Germany, Kurdistan. Where else y'all coming from? We'll be getting started here in just a couple of minutes. Thank you again for joining us. We're really excited to get into the questions that you have today and help you move forward in your job search. Give us a shout, let us know where you're joining from, and put some career questions in the comments, and we'll be getting to them in just a bit. Venezuela, Northwest Florida, Egypt. Ooh, we got some more questions. I like it. All right, we're going to be jumping in just a minute. The first thing I want to do is just say thank you to everyone who's coming back from a previous session that we've had. We've had quite a few of these Ask a Career Coach sessions every single Thursday here on YouTube. And I just want to give a huge shout out to those of you who have been with us along for this ride, asking questions and engaging in the comments and helping each other out along the way. A lot of times I don't have all the answers, and so it's great for us to be able to help each other in the chat as well. One thing that I'm not as well versed on is the technical side of things. I am a career coach, but my background is primarily in marketing, career development, promotion, things of that sort. So I'm really good at helping you figure out how to build a network, how to reach out to people, how to connect, how to interview, how to ask questions, how to promote yourself online. We got some nice sirens in the background here. So when it comes to figuring out how to approach the job search, how to reduce your anxiety, how to reach out to people, and how to perform well under pressure, that's the stuff that we're going to be talking about pretty substantially today. We can also touch on some of the technical things at a high level, including whiteboarding and things of that sort. And then if you have super technical questions, we'll be helping each other out in the chat as well as in Slack in general with other Udacity students. So please bring all your questions and we'll filter through them and answer them as we go through this discussion today. All right, we got Cairo in Pakistan, and it is about 5 after, so we're going to be jumping on in. Thank you again for everyone who is coming back to a second or third or fourth session, and a huge shout out to all of our new viewers. If you are new to this Ask a Career Coach session, the way this works is you ask questions, we answer them. It's pretty straightforward. Put them in the chat, and we'll be getting to your answers over the next hour. So our first question today, what we're going to kick off with is this question of how should I approach the phone interview? And really this is about behavioral interviews in general. We have a lot of anxiety when it comes to different things around the interview, whether it's trying to come off as impressive, trying to remember our answers word for word, trying to maybe showcase a level of expertise that we don't necessarily have. All sorts of different things happen while you're interviewing that make it difficult. And so that's one of the things I want to dig into as we start this conversation today. So if you have any interview related questions, behavioral or phone interview related questions, put them in the chat right now, and it'll help shape the beginning of our discussion here. But the first thing I'm going to dig into is how do you approach a phone interview? Now, there are lots of different types of interviews. There are technical interviews, there are in-person interviews, there are phone interviews, there are video interviews. Give a shout in the comments if you've had to do a phone interview before. Most of us have. And there's two kinds of phone interviews. There's the video interview, what we're doing right now, this kind of a thing. And so when you're thinking about getting ready for this stuff, there's a lot of basic tactics that you just need to keep in mind. And a lot of times what ends up happening is we fail to think through the small things. We spend so much time thinking about our resume and thinking about how we're going to answer questions and all these different things that we just forget about the basics. And that can really catch you off guard if you don't prepare ahead of time. So a couple of things I want to lay out as you're getting ready for a phone interview is that you want to do your system check. And what your system check is something we actually do before every one of these calls. And I actually messed it up today. I had the volume up on my phone where I've got the YouTube going, and you could hear me in the background. You want to make sure that number one, your phone is in a place, you and your phone are in a place that has good signal. If your apartment is constantly dropping calls, don't take the call in your apartment. You also want to be away from noise. So don't take a phone interview at a Starbucks. They've got music playing in the background. They got all sorts of things. And a lot of what I'm going to say here sounds pretty basic, sounds pretty self-explanatory, but you would be surprised to see how many people get stuck in a situation or don't think ahead and end up having to go through these troublesome situations. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you're in a place with great signal, whether that's for a phone or a video interview. If it's video, you need to have solid Wi-Fi. If it's phone, you need to have a solid signal on your phone. You don't want to take a video call on your phone. It's going to be shaky. It's going to be breaking in and out. It's just not as good. So you use a computer for video, use your phone for phone. Next, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have a notepad ready. And on that notepad, write down the name of the person that you're interviewing with. Write down the position that they have at the company. Write down the job that you're applying for, just in case you have like a little brain fart and you forget what job you applied for. You've been looking at all these different job titles. You might say the wrong one by accident. Write down a list of questions that you want to ask, maybe 5 or 6 questions that you want to ask at the end of the interview that you can have ready on standby when they say, we'd like to open it up for questions for the last 10 minutes. And then have a notes section for you to be writing things down during the conversation. And this notes section is very important because when you send your 24-hour follow-up, you're going to want to include some idea or some little tidbit of something that you mentioned or talked about in that interview in your follow-up. It's just a really great way to sort of recall something that was a good talking point or reinforce something you want them to remember about your conversation. Now, another thing that's really helpful to do if you're on a video interview, have a tab open with your resume or print it out. I think it's depending, we live in a digital age, so a lot of times you just have the tab. But if you have a printed version, that's even better. Also, have a tab open with the job description. Maybe write down a couple things from that job description that you want to make sure you mention in the interview into your notepad, or have them highlighted on the screen. Also, you want to maybe even have the LinkedIn of the person you're talking to pulled up. That could help, put a face to the voice that you're hearing in your ears if it's not a video, if it's a phone call. So all of these things will help you just set a solid baseline to get started for the interview so that you're not fumbling over paper, trying to find things, or blanking anytime through your conversation. And then a couple of things if you are doing a phone interview. I guess if you're doing a video interview as well. So I have a standing desk here. So all of my videos that I try to be standing, because standing portrays much more confidence than sitting or slouching or being on a couch or something like that. So if you have the opportunity to be standing during a video interview, it might be helpful. Of course, sitting is pretty standard, so don't worry about it either way. But if you are doing a phone interview, I would highly recommend walking around while you're, or standing or walking while you're having that conversation. It brings more energy into the call, and it really helps the person on the other end feel your energy, feel your excitement. If you're just sitting slouched over, it's kind of interesting that your body language can come through in a voice call. And so if you're standing, if you're smiling, people can actually hear you smile through the phone. These are all very weird little things that you just might not think about until you've done it a couple times. You go, wow, really walking around the room made me much more comfortable. I didn't feel so trapped in my chair. So these are a few things as you're getting ready for a phone interview that I'd like you to keep in mind in order to just make sure that you're portraying the correct amount of, or you're really putting out the correct amount of energy and focus, and you have all your resources that you need at hand so that you don't get stuck at any point during that conversation. If you're prepped ahead of time, you'll always be in a better position. All right, now we're going to be diving into your questions, and I assume some of these will be about the phone interview, some of these will be about pitching, different things of that sort, and we'll be getting into it right now. All right, our first question comes from Abhishek. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. I'm not the best at pronunciation at this point in time. How do I get a phone interview? Thank you so much for your question. You get a phone interview the same way you get any interview. And the crazy thing to realize is that 80% of jobs are found through networking, not through online job boards. So that means maybe 20% are found through online job boards or other means, but 80% are found through people that you know. So how do you get an interview if you don't know anyone who works at these companies? Well, you have to go meet the people who work at these companies. So what you want to do is start by practicing informational interviews. An informational interview is an interview that's not about any one specific job. It's about learning about a role, about an industry, and about a person who you want to, maybe get some insights from. So what you can do, and we've talked about this on previous chats, is you can go to LinkedIn and do a people search in your area for people who have the job title that you wish you had. And then you can set up informational interviews. If you're curious of what an informational interview is in more depth, go to themuse.com and just search it on their site. There's hundreds of articles that will walk you through the ins and outs of how to get one, what to ask during one, et cetera, et cetera. But the key thing here is that you want to make sure you're going on informational interviews and networking. I like to take people out to coffee. That's my preferred way to network. And while you're doing that, while you're going on these coffees, you're doing a couple of things. You're learning about this job. You're learning about industries that you could work in. You're learning about the people that have this job and how they think, what they struggle with, what they're excited about, and so on. And you're practicing interview skills. So when you actually get to a phone interview or get to an in-person interview, you're going to be 10 times more confident because you've already talked about these topics with someone in a low risk, low stress situation. Interview is high risk, high stress, right? You only get one shot at an interview. You get lots of shots at networking, informational interviews. So how do you get a phone interview? You meet people at the company, you take them out for an informational interview, and then at the end of that informational interview, you want to ask them a couple of questions. Who else would you recommend that I chat with? And number two, in the future, if a job opening were to come up, would you be open to sending my resume or passing along my resume? This is not a direct ask of do it right now. It's a future ask. So the person is more likely to say, yeah, sure. If anything comes up, just let me know. Then, you set a reminder on LinkedIn or Indeed or wherever. And when a job does eventually come up a week, a month later, that's when you can reach back out and say, hey, it was really great chatting with you at that informational interview. I really appreciated our conversation. This role just came up. Would you still be open to passing along my resume? And you've already gotten a pre-commitment. This is actually a pretty big marketing sales term, but you've already had them pre-commit to the action. So they are much more likely to actually do it rather than reaching out to a stranger who you've never met, saying, here's my resume. Would you pass it along? If you've never met the person, don't assign them homework. If you've already met them, had a good conversation, and asked permission, then you can ask them to refer you in. And that's really going to be the way that you end up getting a phone interview rather than, hitting for 6 months. You need to do a combination of the two, the job boards and the network combined to let you know what companies need your help, and then you reach out and find your way in. All right. Question number 2. Phyllis has a question about liking to think first before giving an answer. How do I do this on a phone interview? How do I give myself time to think instead of saying, and all those different things? Well, I think the first thing to do here, Phyllis, is cut yourself a little bit of slack. Almost everyone says and like and all these different things. Whenever I go back and I listen to these recordings, I'm saying constantly. And so we just want to give ourselves a little bit of slack because we're not, professional interviewers. It's not our job to be professional interviewers, right? And that is actually a job, right? Like people have podcasts and things like that. See, I'm doing it right now. Now I'm thinking about my uhs. Oh my God. If you really need time to think about an answer, because the alternative is to just, anxiously jump into talking about something and then you're on a rant about something that you didn't even want to talk about in the first place. When they ask you a question, you can calmly say, that's a great question. Let me think about that for a second. Give yourself 10 seconds or 5 seconds, maybe 10 seconds will feel too long. Give yourself 2 to 5 seconds to just go in your mind, what is a good story? What is a good example that I can use to answer this question? And most people can empathize with that because we've all been on interviews. We've all wanted a second to think. And so if you just say, that's a great question, give me a second. I want to make sure I want to make sure I think of the right or the best possible response for you. And so then you give yourself a second and you respond. This is something that happens all the time. But then again, if you say, don't beat yourself up in the moment. It's okay to say, to save some time. Because that's really what we're trying to do when we say, We're trying to think of the next thing. The the likes, it's trying to delay so our brain can get over that little skip that it's doing and get back on track. So give yourself a little bit of slack on this one. And probably the best thing to do would be to go home, take a list of like top 30 interview questions and just record yourself answering those questions on your phone and listen back to it. And then when you're listening back, you'll hear all the ums and the likes and the tangents that you went on. And then what you can do is you can go through, re-record yourself and answer them again with the same answers. And you'll get more sharp with those answers. Then do it again and you'll be more sharp, and do it again, you'll be more sharp. And then when you actually get to the real interview, and this is why I think informational interviews are good, because you'll be doing the same thing there. You'll have heard these stories so many times and said these stories so many times that they'll flow up, flow from your brain much easier, and you won't stumble so much. So that's one thing you can do to reduce the ums and be more confident in the answers that you give. All right, our next question is from Andreas. What are typical questions or cases that you should expect to answer during your interview? This is a great question, Andreas. The best thing you can do here is you can just Google or go to the Muse or go to any career website and look up typical interview questions. And you'll get, 30, 50, 100, the top 1,000 best interview questions, right? And the interesting thing is most people who are interviewing you aren't professional interviewers. They are people who are managers or associates or whatever it is. And they're like, oh, we need someone to help, interview some new candidates. Do you have time? And what that person's going to do is go to Google and look up what questions should I ask when interviewing a candidate. And you're going to have the same list that they have because Google is going to serve up the same results. So you can actually trust these lists pretty well. Now, certain companies will throw you curveballs. They'll say, do a case study or do some crazy thing. And you can also Google like different types of case studies and how to prepare. And then other things that you can do are, what are the things that you want to communicate, right? There's two ways to answer questions. One, wait for the question to come in like I am here, and then try and answer to the best of your ability with a bunch of ums and likes and things like that. Or go in with the stories you already want to tell and relate your stories back to their questions. So let's say you have a story about a project that you worked on that you are really proud of. I built this app using this API with this team that accomplished this result. Now, if they ask you, what's a time that you worked well with other team members? You can say, there was this one app that I built using this API. I worked with these team members, and you doubled down on that part of the story, and we got this result. And then later they'll say, what's a time that you struggled with a coworker? And you'll say, well, while working on that project that I've already mentioned, there was one coworker in particular whose name was Johnny, and Johnny and I just didn't see eye to eye on how to solve this one particular issue. So now you're just going deeper into that story from a different perspective. And then you can relate, and we still were able to complete the project and get this outcome. So when you're thinking about these things, you really only need like 3 to 5 stories that are good, because you can talk about strengths, weaknesses, conflict, collaboration, all these things with just a handful of stories. So go through your Rolodex in your head. What were the times where I really enjoyed my job? What were the projects that I really enjoyed working on? What were the hardest things I ever did in my career? What were those moments that can really come up in a lot of different answers to these questions? And then again, go back to that idea of recording yourself and listening to yourself. That's how you can really start to practice these things. But typical questions will be around your strengths, your weaknesses, examples of management experience, examples of things you've built, and the list goes on and on. The key thing to remember here, though, is that you want to think about the question behind the question. Now, they might say, what are your strengths and weaknesses? But really what they're saying is, how are you going to fit into this team? Are you self-aware? Do you understand that there's things that you're trying to develop, and how are you developing those things? Just saying my strength is that I try too hard or something like that doesn't show them how you work through problems, how you build your self-awareness, different things of that sort. So always try and see what the question is behind the question. And the same goes with like, tell me about yourself. When they say tell me about yourself, you're not supposed to talk about, your vacation with your family last year. You're supposed to talk about things that are relevant to them. They want to know why you're talking to them. Why are we in a room together? What is it that we are aligned on? And what are we trying to accomplish? Are we on the same page? Those are the questions that they're trying to ask you. They just use the generic ones from the internet rather than asking those questions. All right, our next question is from Sunit. Uh, how can I answer positively when I get a question that I'm not sure how to answer? This is a really interesting question, and I'll be honest, I'm not sure how to answer it. Uh, there's a few different things that you can do. One, give your best answer. What do you think they are trying to ask you? And what is the best possible answer that you could give them? The other thing is, if you have never had experience with something, let's say, so it's like, tell me about a time that you've worked with XYZ programming language, right? And you've never worked with that programming language. How do you answer that positively? Well, there's the negative way to answer it, which is, I've never worked with that. And then there's just this awkward silence in the interview, right? It's like, well, that's not the best way to answer it, right? You always want to answer with a positive spin of some sort, right? So, well, I've never worked with that language specifically. However, these are the languages that I'm familiar with, and here's how I learned them, and here's what I've done with the information that I have. So when I was learning Java, the first thing I did was XYZ, and I'm now able to build these types of things with that knowledge. I would do the same thing when learning, whatever the other thing, Python is, or whatever the other thing is, right? And you're relating something you have done with the thing that they're asking you about. So that's another way to answer it. And then worst case scenario, let's say it's something so far out of the realm that you don't have any experience and you don't know how to answer and you don't have any stories that relate. Then you just say, actually, that's something that I'm not really familiar with at this time, but it sounds like a really exciting area to get into. Do you have any recommendations of how I could get up to speed quickly in that area? And now you're, again, answering by saying, I don't really have an answer, but you're asking for help. You're showing that you're going to do something after this conversation rather than just accept the fact that you don't know it and go home and, I don't know, move on to the next thing. So one cool thing about that, and this, I think a great example of this is, let's say you do a whiteboarding interview and you get the wrong answer. What do you do next? Most people go home, kick themselves because they got the wrong answer, don't write a thank you note because they don't want to hear back negative news, and then turn on Netflix and try to distract themselves. Someone else who's trying to really build themselves and grow as a person would go home, try and think of what the question was that they asked, maybe do a little bit more work, see if they can solve it again on their own, or do a little bit more research into that area, and then send a follow-up thank you note within 24 hours that says, hey, it was a real pleasure chatting with you today. After our conversation, when I hit that wall during the whiteboarding piece, it really showed me that I needed to learn more about X, Y, and Z. So when I got home today, I looked up this and I read that and I tried this, and I wanted to share that with you and just say thank you so much for having me in. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'd love to continue it and see what the next steps are. That's how you always be a proactive rather than a reactive person in your interviews and in your job search. So try and always approach things from a much more positive, action-oriented way, and you'll be putting yourself in a very successful position. All right, Sunny, I've got a phone interview in a few days. There's a requirement in the role that I don't have experience with. What should I answer when asked about this requirement? This is a great question because a couple of things pop out to me. The first one is that job descriptions are typically an idealized list of the perfect candidate. So they will include everything in the kitchen sink in there when they create that list. They'll say, I want someone who has 2 to 5 years experience for an entry-level job. I want someone who knows every single language. I want someone who can build things from scratch and be an entrepreneur, and so on and so forth. What they're trying to do when they build a job description is cast a wide net. And most people, unfortunately, according to recent statistics, won't apply to a job that they don't have 100% of the qualifications for. But what they don't understand is that no one has 100% of the qualifications for any of these jobs. And if you were 100% qualified for that job, you shouldn't be applying for that job. You should be applying for the senior version of that job. So if you only meet like 60%, 70% of the requirements in the job listing, it's still worth applying to. Then if they ask you about, let's say, a programming language that you're not familiar with, you can talk about how quickly you're able to learn programming languages. You can maybe do a little bit of research on that programming language before you go in and say, I saw that in the job listing and I started reading this book and that thing and doing this. And I'm really curious, like, do you have any recommendations of how I could, learn this faster? Or are there any people at the company I could talk to really get up to speed as quickly as possible? Because it's really exciting and I love learning these things, right? So address it in a way that shows that you're doing something rather than just accepting the fact that you don't have that skill. So you've got a few days. Try and just do some basic research so that you at least know what each one of those things are. If they go in and they ask you something and you're like, I've never even heard of that before, that's going to be a little bigger of an issue. But if it's in the job listing, you've heard of it. So now just do some basic research. All right, our next question is from Kartik. I have an interview this week for a research position internship and we'll be talking with a leading scientist. But this is my first interview. Help me. How can I make sure I impress them? All right. So this idea of impressing people is what really gets to the core of our anxieties in the job search. And the truth of the matter is that when you go in for an interview, being impressive is less impressive than being curious. So if you go in and you try to be a know-it-all, no one wants to work with a know-it-all. No one wants to work with someone who comes in day one and says, I know all the answers. I'm not going to ask any questions. Do what I say. Cancel these projects. You're doing it wrong. Do it like this. No one wants to work with that person, even if they're right. People want to work with the person who's curious, the person who says, why are we doing it this way? What led us to doing it this way? Are there any other things that we've explored? How did they work? Have we thought about how this new technology might be beneficial? Have we tried it? Have we tested it? What have been the results? People want to talk to curious people, not necessarily someone who just thinks they have all the answers. So as you're prepping for this interview, there's probably a ton of things that this scientist knows that you would love to know, right? They are probably, way ahead of you in their career. They probably have a ton of experience with a lot of different technologies. They probably have their pulse on the future of the industry. When you go in, ask them about them. Make it less about you. If you can get someone talking about things they're excited about, they're going to be excited. They're going to leave that conversation feeling good about this conversation. And so, you want to be clear and concise in the answers that they ask you. And then you want to ask them about things that they care about. If you do those two things, if you can be clear and concise and you can be curious, you're going to really stand out from the pack. So I hope you give yourself a little bit of slack. Go online, look up good questions to ask during an interview, and go back to what we said before of practicing your answers before you get there. Don't go in without an idea of what you're hoping to say. Again, go back through your list of projects that you've worked on in the past. What did you enjoy? What did you struggle with? Where are you currently trying to grow? Those are the things that are going to really make you stand out. If you can show that you are a lifelong learner and that you are curious, you're going to be in a really great spot. All right. Again, thank you everyone for submitting your questions here. We've got really good ones coming in. So if you have something on your mind and you're feeling hesitant, just put it in. I'm going to try and get to as much as I can in the next half hour. All right, our next one, Gregory. Hey Martin, I've done a couple of phone interviews recently, 10 plus, with recruiters about roles in the self-driving car industry. Some recruiters keep focusing on my current job, which is not related um, which is not related to what I'm looking for, which is software implementation specialist versus deep learning perception engineer. And I think they see me as a professional with no experience in the field, even if I've gained the skills from the self-driving car nano degree. I'm wondering if I need to refocus my research on more entry-level roles or find a way to better explain my career move to these recruiters. Let me know your thoughts. All right, Greg. There's a number of things that stand out here. The first thing is that you're talking to recruiters and not people who are working in the job that you want or hiring managers. So recruiters have a very tough job. Their job is to sift through thousands of people to find the best person for their client, who's not you, you're not their client. Their client is the company that hired them to fill the role. So when they reach out to you, they're only asking about your past experience because that's all they can verify when they go and pitch you to the company. And so they really only want to pitch sure things to the company. They don't want to go to the company with people who might be good or people who are working towards being good. They want to go to the company with someone who has history with a big company, history with a good, a prestigious school, history with a certain technology for a long period of time. They want sure things. They are not going to risk their reputation on a maybe. So when you're thinking about working with recruiters, you have to realize that if you want them to pitch you correctly, you have to pitch them on what you want. Now, this is tough because recruiters are trying to deal with thousands of people, So I personally think your time will be better spent reaching out to people who work at the company and trying to find your way in through networking rather than through a recruiter. It doesn't mean recruiters are bad, and it doesn't mean that they can't be helpful. It just means that what you're experiencing right now is something that I hear a lot. I mean, fight it all you want, but they're trying to get answers. They're not trying to learn about your life story, right? And again, some of them are very good people, and they're good people, and they want to know about you, and they want to be able to pitch you. But at the end of the day, they're just dealing with such vast numbers of people, So either you make it easy for them by creating a personal brand that is so focused on the new thing you want to be doing that they can really validate your skill set based off of your online presence and not have to worry about the company saying this person doesn't seem qualified, or you need to find another way in. So that would be my recommendation here. Try not to outsource your job search to anyone other than yourself. You're in control of your job search. You're in control of your network. You're in control of reaching out to people and getting interviews. If you try to give that to someone else because you don't want to do the networking work, you're going to get the results that you're getting. So keep that in mind. Keep moving forward. When you do talk to them, just say, I'm trying to move into this direction, and they'll either be on board with it or they won't. And then you can move on to the next recruiter or the next networking conversation that you're going to have. Thank you so much for your question. All right, here we go. Perla, I'm a former IT teacher with 8 years of experience. I am looking for a position as a developer, and I'm not sure about what to answer when they ask how many years of experience that I have. Some advice. I love this question, Perla. All right, experience. Experience is a loaded question, right? I talk to people all the time who are like, I don't have any experience in, front-end development, yet they've had experience in 4 or 5 jobs, and they've been they're about 10 to 12 years into their career. So experience means different things to different people. It means something to you. It means something to the person you're talking to. Different hiring managers at different companies will expect it to mean different things. It's really hard to know what a company is looking for when it comes to experience. Now, we might want to say, oh, the job says I need 2 to 5 years of experience. That means 2 to 5 years of experience in this very specific role. But oftentimes that isn't the case. A lot of companies will interview people that have experience in slightly related roles, in slightly different roles. They'll look at your education. It's really about the whole package, right? You got to look at everything you've done. And the big thing that I want to emphasize here is do not discount your experience. Do not say, because I was a teacher, my experience isn't relevant for this new role, because everyone's experience is relevant in some way, shape, or form. My marketing experience has helped me as a coach. That's why we've got these videos going on. So everything you've done builds on itself, and everything you've done has a skill associated with it. Has collaboration skills, has execution skills, has technical skills, there's all soft skills, hard skills, everything that goes into it. So when someone says, how much experience do you have? You can actually break it down for them. Don't just say, I only have 6 months of experience in my nano degree. Say, in my past, I started my career doing this. I was a teacher with 8 years of experience in IT, which has given me a really great perspective on how to work with people, how to educate people, how to not only execute, but inform my management on how I get things done, et cetera, et cetera. And then say, and I've added to that experience my nano degree and my side projects and my internships and my other work. So it's all about framing it as an evolution and building a little like a Lego wall of your experience, right? So all these pieces come together over time and they all add up to being your experience. So if you're being asked this question, just talk about that full picture. I've had experience with this, I've had experience with this, I've had experience with this, and they all combine to be about 12 years of overall experience. And I'm really excited to bring this experience to your company so I can help you solve problems and do X, Y, and Z. Relate it back to what they need. And that's really going to show that your background connects with the future that you want, which is this role with this company. All right, this next question is a big one. Amir, I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Amir, I have an interview soon, but I want to reschedule to study more and be more prepared. Should I do that, or would that leave a bad impression? I really appreciate this question. It's one that comes up not only with like scheduled interviews, but also with take-home, like assignments and things of that sort. You never, ever want to reschedule your interview unless there is some sort of family emergency or other thing that comes up. Rescheduling your interview does a number of negative things in the process. It shows that you can't hit a deadline, which is really bad when trying to get a job. It shows that you don't honor your commitments, also really bad when applying for a job. And it puts you at a disadvantage because in the time that you are giving, let's say you reschedule it for a week out. First of all, how much more are you going to learn in the next week than what you know right now? Probably not a ton. So unless you're scheduling it out for another year where you're going to go learn a new language or something, you're probably not going to get much out of that week. But then what it's really going to do is just put you at a disadvantage because they're going to start bringing in other people. You're going to say, I'll talk to you next week. And they're going to say, all right, in the next week, we're going to interview 5 more people. And now you've got 5 more people that you're competing with for that job. Do not reschedule your interviews. Make them work. And this also goes for take-home interviews. I recently was working with someone who had a take-home interview. They reached out on like a Monday and they said, hey, let us know when you're able to do this take-home interview. And they said, I can do it on Thursday, right? Again, you're giving too many days for other people to be turning in their assignment. Who's going to look better? The person who got reached out to on Monday and turns it in on Tuesday, or the person that got reached out to on Monday and turns it in on Friday or the next Monday? clearly the person who gets it in within the day. And they're also going to be considered sooner and first. When you want to limit the number of people who can cut in front of you in line. So do not put off an interview. Do not put off your stuff. Own where you're at in the process, move forward and go after it. At the very worst, you're going to learn something and you'll be ready for the next interview. At the very best, you'll be the first person that they talk to and they're going to go, that was a really great conversation. Let's keep moving forward. I really appreciate that question. That's a hard one. And I understand. I feel for you. It doesn't feel good to not feel ready, but this is where you got to step up and take ownership and say, what do I know? What don't I know? I'm going to own what I know. I'm going to learn as much as I can about what I don't know, and then I'm going to figure out how to talk about what I don't know if they ask me about it in the interview, like we talked about earlier in this conversation. All right, Al. Al has our next question. Famous question from almost every employer. They always ask, why do you want to work for us? What would be the best response? I love this, Al. Thank you so much for asking this question. This is something that comes up a lot when I'm trying to coach people. I always sit down and I talk to people, and we've actually made a couple videos about this. And I say, where do you want to work? What industry and what company? And inevitably, everyone says, I want to work in tech, which is everything now. Everything is tech. There isn't a single industry that's not tech. I mean, I'm watching woodworking videos on Instagram. So Instagram is tech. They're doing woodworking. Clearly, it's a tech company, right? They have to do e-commerce somehow. Everything is tech. So that's a non-answer. And then they say they want to work at Facebook, Google, and whatever the other, Tesla, right? And I say, why? And usually the answer is, well, because it's Facebook, Google, and Tesla. Duh. Why wouldn't I want to work there? And of course, why wouldn't you want to work there? But why would you want to work there other than the brand name and the money? Like, if the only reason you want to work at this company is because it helps you, why should this company want you? That's the big question, right? So if I only want to work at this company because it helps put a big brand name on my resume and, gives me money to go spend on the weekends, and that company asks me, well, why do you want to work here? And I just say, because it'll look good on me. They're going to be like, well, what are you going to do for us? We're the ones paying you. We're the ones giving you all that value. Are you going to give us anything back? So you really have to ask yourself, why Google? Why Google? Why Facebook? My favorite twist on this was I had a student who wanted to work at Amazon, and they said, I want to work at Amazon because it's Amazon. And I said, well, where would you want to work within Amazon? And we got down to, they want to work on the voice systems, right? I want to say Alexa, but then she'll talk in the background. So I asked why. Well, they have a background in linguistics, and they're they're currently a programmer, and they're really interested in the merger of language, spoken language, and programming languages. Well, now we're cooking with fire, right? Now we can say, all right, so we can put Amazon on your list. That can be the center of the map. Now, what other companies work with voice? Phone companies, other tech companies, car companies, little robot AI companies, right? There are so many companies working on voice. Hearing aid companies, there's all sorts of different things. And that really broadens out the scope so that you're not so hyper-focused on any one company. You're focused on improving language, improving the language barrier between people and machines. And that was what they ended up doing. They ended up chasing that. And so when they get asked by any of these companies, why do you want to work here? Well, I have a background in linguistics. I'm super fascinated by the interaction of humans and machines. And I think voice is going to be the key component there. Your company is working on doing that in cars. And I'm really excited to help you build more human systems that can interact more seamlessly with the passengers in the cars. Boom, that's a great answer. If they went to Tesla and said, well, it's Tesla and you got an interesting founder and those flamethrowers at the Boring Company were cool, like that's just a bad answer. So I would say I don't have a best response for you, but I would ask yourself, what do you actually care about? What are the industries that you think will make an impact in the world that you're interested in being part of? You know, if you are really interested in sports technology, you can talk about being introduced to sports by your, dad as a kid. Maybe you went to baseball games together or something like that. If you're really interested in video games, you can talk about, the world building and the storytelling and different things like that. If you're really interested in media, you can talk about how communication is the best way to, change people's minds at a world level, right? Worldwide level. And so all these different things play into why you want to do what you're doing. And so really take a look at what you enjoy about the technology you're working with, the work you're doing, and ask yourself, well, if this were to be blown out to the biggest level, is it something that I care about? And that's going to be how you answer why you want to work at that company. And again, it could be their mission. It could be, well, this company works on AI, and I think AI is really interesting. Maybe it's technology focused. But everyone should have a reason. If you're just applying to a company because you want a job and you want money, I'm sorry, it's just a bad pitch. And so we got to really think a little bit deeper and say, beyond the money, let's say you had two jobs that both offered the same amount of money and the same amount of prestige, but one worked on, self-driving cars that will reduce driving deaths around the world, and the other one sold cigarettes. Which would you be more interested in working at, and why, right? And so you can kind of work your way back from what don't I want into what do I want if you really don't know where to start. So hopefully that helps get the wheels turning a little bit. All right, we got about 10 minutes. I'm trying to move as quickly as I can through these questions, but we do have quite a few. Thank you again for submitting all these great questions. I'm going to try and find some of the more universal ones here to wrap us up today. All right. This next one, because it relates to a video I just posted earlier today, Abdul Rahman, is LinkedIn a must for an interview? I put my work on GitHub and rarely use LinkedIn and other social platforms. What disadvantages can that give me? Love this question. So there's a few things to think about here. Not having a LinkedIn at all is a big red flag, because then they say it's like not having a resume. It's like, well, why not? Like, it takes 2 seconds to just create the account, put your face on it, and whatever. Now, I have run into situations where people don't do it for security reasons. Maybe they work for the government and they aren't allowed to. Maybe I actually had someone who had a stalker and they were like, I can't have a LinkedIn. I was like, well, that's a fair reason. That's a pretty good reason not to have a LinkedIn. And then I had someone who, worked in data security, and they said, I don't like LinkedIn, I don't like Facebook, but now that's part of their pitch. I don't have a LinkedIn or Facebook because I work in security, and I think those websites lack security. And that's a really interesting thing. So they have to find people off those sites. Now, it's possible to get a job without a LinkedIn. I'm not going to say it's completely impossible, but boy, does it help when you have one. It helps because there's two things that happen with LinkedIn. Number one, companies can find you. The first thing I'm going to do when I interview someone is Google them. And usually the first result that comes up is their LinkedIn. If they don't have a personal site, if they don't have a blog, if they're not on YouTube, etc., their LinkedIn is typically what comes up first. If nothing comes up and I'm going in blind, it makes it just a harder way to get to know someone. And so what you can do with these websites by having them is make it easier for someone to feel like they already know you before we talk. That's the whole point. To feel like we already have a connection before we sit down. It reduces anxiety on both sides and everyone's a little bit happier. Now, if you have a LinkedIn, it doesn't have to be the best profile in the world. We actually did tests on this. To go from no LinkedIn at all to at least having a LinkedIn with basic information on it, huge spike in hiring managers wanting to talk to that person. Now, having basic information versus robust information kind of levels out a little bit. The graph kind of evens out a little bit. So just get the basics in and you should be fairly good. But I really will say the disadvantage is that you just don't get the visibility. Imagine if Nike refused to go on social media. we would forget that they sell shoes eventually, because that's where the conversation is. So you need to be part of the conversation. So what I would recommend if you want to increase your chances and be seen more is to comment on people's profiles, write articles, share links, because that will keep your face popping up in the feed. A lot of you know me from these videos, know me from the career tip videos that we've been doing on LinkedIn and YouTube. And I can't tell you how many opportunities and interesting conversations come out of those things. Just more people to talk to, more data points, more comments, more feedback. Like, you learn a lot by engaging in these platforms. I would say it's as important as a resume. So at least have the basics there. At least copy your resume onto LinkedIn, because it's a digital resume at the most basic version. So I would highly recommend you do that. Also, GitHub doesn't show up on Google as easily as LinkedIn. It doesn't rank as high for some reason. All right, and we're getting into the last 4 minutes here. So before we wrap up, I want to do a couple of things. The first thing I want to do is promote a webinar that's coming up called Succeeding as a Freelancer. We're going to link it in the chat here, and I highly recommend that if any of you are trying to find contract work or just trying to build your own thing or do some projects, to sign up for that webinar. It's going to be really great. It's on 2/26, and it's just going to be a great time for anyone who's really curious about that area. The next thing I want to promote is that we do these every single Thursday. So please share these with anyone you know. Go register for the next one. I believe we'll be putting the link in the chat as well. Invite friends to come join us next time. And these are also recorded and kept up on YouTube if you ever want to come back and check out our conversation again. So feel free to come back, rewatch it, put some comments in, and help each other out. The key thing here is like this community, this ability for us to help each other out and connect is so vital in order to keep these things moving. And you know, there's so many things that I just don't know the answer to. So some of you can probably help each other. So I really appreciate you engaging with each other, connecting with each other after these. I know a lot of people go to LinkedIn and connect, and now you're part of each other's network, helping each other out, liking each other's stuff. So please go do that. And then we have 2 minutes left. I'm going to try and answer one more question, see what we got here. All right. All right, our last question from Ryan. How successful are informational interviews via a phone call or video call? You may be looking for work if you are looking for work in another country. Honestly, 10 years ago, I would have said it's really difficult. But we live in a very, very connected world, and video is becoming easier and easier and easier. Hangouts, Skype, Zoom, all these things make it incredibly easy to do video interviews and phone interviews. So I actually think that there's, you know, the best possible thing would be a 3D in-person meeting, of course. But I think that video calls and phone calls, you can get a lot of distance out of these technologies. I can tell you I've been hired for jobs just through the internet. So the key thing is, how do you practice them when you're not interviewing, right? We're not typically, you know, calling up our friends and saying, let's Skype. I mean, some people do. They live, you know, they moved away. They live far from people. But I would encourage you to take some time in the coming months to set up maybe some Skype calls with a family member or a friend, just to get familiar with the technology, because there's a lot of glitching that happens on Hangouts and Zoom and Skype. There's a lot of weird stuff that happens. So if you're looking for work and you know you're going to have to do phone interviews and video interviews, try and get a little practice using these different platforms and different technologies. It'll really help set you up for success so that you're not fumbling with links or trying to figure out how to join a call or create an account or update your Skype. That's a key thing. Updating Skype is constantly wanting to update. So sometimes you'll be late to an interview because it's refreshing itself. Test out your systems. Try doing a few calls on your own. Make sure you've got the basics down. And really, at the end of the day, they are pretty successful. We're moving into a very remote heavy world, which means lots of people are getting very comfortable working like this. So I think they're pretty successful personally, and definitely worthwhile getting to know. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to wrap up right now. Again, my name is Martin McGovern. If you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn after this and ask more questions, I'm happy to continue the conversation there. Please connect with each other. Join us next week. Hit up that how to freelance webinar, and I look forward to checking out more questions from all of you next week. Have a good one.